Hello, I'm Dr. Ahmed Abdelal, and in this unit, we'll be speaking about respiration and phonation as part of speech and hearing science for students of speech language pathology, especially the ones taking speech and hearing. So we start with a quick review of respiration, and also phonation will begin with a with a quick review. This speech and hearing has a lot of anatomy and physiology, not in the sense that it should be a rehash of anatomy and physiology, but it is more of relating the anatomy and physiology to the science of speech production. So if there's anything that you need, for example, to refresh on in terms of anatomy and physiology, you have your textbook, you can go back to AMP, but your speech and hearing text is going to give you more than enough, and it connects both the anatomy and the physiology together, and actually it goes deeper than the regular anatomy book that you have. So let's begin, and we begin just with a quick refresher, again, quick review of the physiological process of respiration. So we know that the purpose of respiration is to survive. That's the biological function. Functions. Biological means, serve life. So then the most important, however, secondary function of respiration for us in terms of communication is speech production. The respiratory system gives us the supply, the air supply that we need in order to generate all the speech mechanisms. So you learned from your anatomy class that the respiratory muscles and all the system work together to enable you to inhale. And once you have inhaled, then you start exhaling, and upon exhalation, then you shut down the vocal folds. You add ductal vocal folds like this, and the air streams in between them, forcing the medial edges of the vocal folds open, and as a result, you get vibrations. So speaking is a secondary function, but in communication, it is critical. And of course, without sufficient air supplies, you wouldn't have the air, you wouldn't be able to build enough pressures and so on. So the amount of air that we need changes based on our age, based on lung capacity, based on body size, based on gender, and a lot of things make it change, make it different. However, what we have here is just average and, for example, number of breaths. And we know that for yourself, the number of breaths per minute is going to change based on what you are doing. So what we are speaking about here is breath per minute based on resting, regular tidal breathing. So for infants, and that includes basically newborns up to a couple of years old, they need about 40 to 70 breaths per minute. Like the newborn needs about 70 breaths per minute. So as the children grow, they have larger thoraxes, and they will be able to build reserve. But the newborns don't have much room to have a lot of reserve, so they have to breathe faster. 5 years old, on average, they need about 25 breaths per minute, and then it decreases as we age. So 15 years old is going to have a larger chest, a larger thorax, and that is going to enable them to breathe at 20 times per minute, and then adults will be about 12 to 18 breaths per minute. Recall, one breath is one inhalation and one exhalation. That is one breath. So the respiratory system consists of two big kind of divisions. The skeletal structure, that is made out of bone and cartilage. That's all. We know that the skeletal structure consists of the thorax. The thorax is constructed with vertebrae, what are known as thoracic vertebrae. These are 12. And out each vertebra, you have 2 ribs coming out, and 7 of the ribs, called the true ribs, the ones on top, from here to the middle of the chest. These connect to the sternum, and you have 7 of these. And after that, you have 3 ribs, number 8, 9, and 10. These go, and they don't have a direct connection to the sternum, but they kind of have their cartilage connected to the rib number 7, and they reach to connect indirectly to the sternum. Then we have 2 little ribs that have no connection to the sternum, that like small ones, numbers 12 and 11 and 12, and these are called the floating ribs, and they enable us to bend our back, to bend down and fold our body in half, if you will. So then we're gonna speak about the pleura. Pleura is a thin lining, thin transparent lining around the lungs from all sides, and also around other structures that are nearby the lungs. One pleura, two would become pleurae, A-E, pleurae. So then the pleurae, when they get together, they are going to, and they studied this in anatomy and physiology, shouldn't be brand new for you. When they come together, there's a little gap in between them that is filled with fluid, and that gap is called the pleural cavity, and that gap is going to have negative air pressure. So first, let me again review more. The pleura is a thin, transparent layer. Like imagine this like bag here. And there's a video here, 2 videos that I have on Blackboard that have that show you the pleura in live, like in the lungs. This transparent bag like this, but it's all soft and very filled with, like very slippery. And it lines up the entire lung. Imagine this is a lung here. So the lung will be basically encased in it like this. So then you have the interior wall of the thorax. That interior wall has to be smooth because you have the lungs as soft tissue, and the lungs will expand, will rise and come down and move in and out. They cannot come with hard, structures. We have bones and cartilage. So the interior inside of the thoracic wall is lined up with also with another pleura, like tiny. If you get like an onion, take a cortex of one onion, and you'll find that thin, transparent white layer. Get a bunch of them, like 4 or 5, put them together. That would be similar to the pleura. So anyways, there's a pleura lining the interior surfaces of the thorax, interior walls of the thorax. And these walls, a wall called parietus means wall. So that pleura is called the parietal pleura. That is the thorax lining, interior lining. Then you have the lungs, and the lungs themselves are encased in a pleura called the 2 names, either the pulmonary pleura or the visceral pleura, visceral. So you put, when the 2 pleurae are together, coming and kind of touching each other like this, there is the tiny space, very tiny microscopic space in between them that is filled with fluid. That space is called the pleural cavity, sometimes the interpleural cavity. So the pleural cavity. So again, what do we have now? We have just one example. We have here parietal pleura. We have the visceral pleura or the pulmonary pleura. And in between them, there's a space, a little tiny gap. So 3 things now. 2 pleurae, 1 gap, the pleural cavity in between. Whenever that situation occurs, it doesn't matter what pleura you get and what 2 pleurae that you get. It does not matter. Whenever you create that situation, you have 1 pleura coming in touch with another pleura, and the space in between them, the pleural cavity, you have now created the conditions for a pleural linkage. Okay, linkage. Linkage is not a structure. Do not make this big mistake. Okay, when I say pleura, the pleura is something that you can touch, you can hold, you can tear out, but linkage is not something, it is not visible. Linkage is the effect, like gravity. It is something that is not visible. Okay, so do not make the mistake. Now, the question now is, so how do you create a linkage? You need 2 pleurae, you need a cavity in between them called the interpleural cavity or the pleural cavity. And so that is 3 conditions, 3 things now, and 2 more. Inside of the pleural cavity, you have to have 2 conditions to create suction, to make them stick to each other. Okay, like if you have 2 pieces of glass and you put a little droplet of water on one of them, take the other pane of glass and put it on top and just kind of rub it a bit. So you notice when you hold one, if you get a piece of glass and lift it, it will be stuck to the other one. Even though they are two separate pieces, okay? They create a linkage. It's like when you have the suction cup of your, if you are using, still using a, what do you call it, a GPS system with a suction cup. The attraction, when you put the suction cup in, you have the glass, you have the suction cup, and you have negative pressure inside, in between. That creates suction. That makes that piece stick to the window, to the windshield. Okay? So that attraction, that holding together, adherence, you cannot see it. It is not a structure. It's just the byproduct. It results from having these conditions I'm speaking of. So the linkage is not the same as the pleura. So pleural linkage is the effect when you have two pleurae, any two pleurae. You bring them together, and there's in between, because they're slippery and they have like tiny gaps in between. This tiny space, tiny gap in between is called the pleural cavity. So three things now. Inside of the pleural cavity, you must have negative air pressure, slightly negative, more negative than the inside of the lungs, especially 4 points. Then you also have a slippery, thin fluid called surfactant, S-U-R-F, surfactant, like this to remind you, fact and then ant, surfactant. So that surfactant, it fills in all these tiny gaps and creates a nice seal so that you have now the lungs from the outside, the walls, outside walls of the lungs will be stuck, will adhere to the interior wall of the thorax, like two pieces of glass when they put them together. So in effect, we are basically pulling all the lung walls out and making them stick to the walls of the thorax so that the lungs will remain open all the time, okay? So do not mistake the pleura for the pleural linkage. The pleura is a structure, physical, anatomic structure that you see, you hold, you touch. The linkage is the effect. It is not a structure. It results, it's like something, a force, a gravity or something like that. So that basically, there are three pleural linkages that enable the lungs to be suspended from above and connecting them to the diaphragm below and sticking to the walls of the thorax so that they can stay all the time inflated. You have air inside of them all the time. If these linkages do not work, they fail, the person could have collapsed lung, okay? So any linkage needs these conditions. You cannot create a linkage without having these 5 conditions I mentioned. 2 pleurae, the pleural cavity in between. Inside of the pleural cavity, you have to have negative air pressure, and you have to have surfactant in a pleural linkage this way. An additional function of surfactant is 2 things, 2 more functions of surfactant in addition to helping the adherence process, to helping the exterior walls of the lungs adhere to the walls of the thorax, and also later, as we explained, to the diaphragm. So in addition to this function, surfactant is an antibacterial agent, like in the consistency, in the way that you have dish detergent. The detergent when you use that you use to wash dishes by hand, okay, thin and slippery, and it's basically, this is like a mixture of oil and water, and they are mixed in a certain way. So that is gonna make it possible for the lungs to be moving up and down, and for the thorax to be expanding, and they have independent movements, so that without damaging, it makes the movement smooth, and you do not even feel it when you breathe, okay? So that's just on the side. 2 additional functions of surfactant. It's antibacterial, protects the lungs from all around so that you don't have pathogens coming in. In addition, being slippery, it enables the lungs to have a smooth movement with no effort, and you don't even feel it when you breathe. So then, we speak about the linkages. We have 3 different linkages. Each one has its own construction. Each one has its own functions. However, all of them have these 5 elements, are the product of these 5 elements that I just mentioned. So we have the parietal pulmonary linkage, that enables the walls, exterior walls of the lungs to adhere to the walls, to the interior surface of the thorax. And we have the diaphragmatic pulmonary linkage that enables the bottom of the lungs to stick to the dorsum of the diaphragm. And we have the apical or the cervical linkage that is under your shoulders, and it makes the top of each lung adhere to the inferior surface of the cervix so that the lungs will be sucked from above and held from above. So 3 different linkages, each one has different functions, and you really, really need to understand what a linkage is, what a pleura is, the conditions that are needed to create a linkage, and what each linkage, what each one of these 3 and the functions, exact functions of each one. Now remember that this is a science class. Science requires absolute precision. So if I say to you exact, precise, that is not just words I am using. I mean exact and precise, specific. I know people use these words, they lose their meaning. But when you ever hear them in a science class like speech and hearing, know that specific means to the point, precise. And if you make a change in one single word, then you have made a big mistake. So the skeletal structure of the lungs is made up of the thorax and these pieces of cartilage that on the anterior surface, the anterior part of the thorax. Not everyone, I mean, they connect to the sternum through a little segment of cartilage that connects the bony segment of each rib with the sternum. And we said that the false ribs number 8, 9, and 10, these combine, they're called false ribs. They combine their cartilage together and attach to the cartilage of number 7, and they are now have a connection to the sternum. Then the floating ribs, these little small ones here, they do not have a direct connection. They do not have cartilage. So the purpose of the cartilage here, if you didn't have cartilage here, you would not be able to breathe. So the cartilage extends without, and it is tough, it doesn't break easily, and it gives that flexibility for the thorax to be elevated by the muscles without moving the sternum. So when you elevate the ribs, and these little pieces of cartilage will be twisted out, like it is called torquing, like this, torqued. And because they are cartilage, once they immediately snap back quickly to where they were. So that is torquing. So during inhalation, when you inhale, these the ribs are elevated and straightened out a little bit like that, almost horizontal, and they're gonna cause the cartilage pieces to be twisted, to be torqued, while the sternum remains in the same position. So that allows the thorax to expand, anteriorly, posteriorly. I call it antero-posterior expansion, and to be expanded transversely to the sides, So that transversal expansion involves the lower part of the thorax, where the pieces of cartilage are very, very big, and that allows you a lot of flexibility in the abdominal area. In the area, between the between the ribs below the thorax, in that triangle there. So you notice also that the pieces of cartilage, they start from the top of the ribs being very small and become bigger and bigger and bigger as you go lower. So you get the greatest amount of expansion right from the area below the xiphoid process to the end of the ribs, all of this area where the diaphragm is, like this whole structure from inside. So you notice the diaphragm is shaped like two parachutes connected to, like a parachute, or like two little domes connected together like this, and it sits right under the lungs. It's connected, only the edges of it are connected, while everything else is, just smoothly there. It is not connected to anything, so it can go up and down. And inhalation, there are muscles of inhalation and muscles of exhalation. I do not need to go through that. You need to, it is all explained in your textbook and also in your anatomy and physiology. So it is just, you need to review that information to refresh and connect it also to this, what we are speaking here about. So then, the pleurae, now, as I mentioned, here is the tissue of the lung itself. The surface of the lung itself, and what is covering it here is It's called the pleura here, and that is called the pulmonary pleura or the visceral. Then the thorax, here are the parts of the thoracic wall here, obviously cut, and you can see where the pieces of ribs here and muscles in between, and then right inside, this lining here, you are going to have the parietal pleura. So they sometimes call it the pleura, the costal pleura, but the parietal, because this part of the thorax is like a wall, and that is called the parietal pleura. And in between here, you have the pleural cavity, that little thin area, and then the lungs themselves have that transparent layer that is the visceral or the pulmonary pleura lining the lungs. So this here is the parietal pleura that is actually lining the thorax. That is continuation of this. Then you have the diaphragm. The diaphragm itself is covered with a pleura lining it also. So see, here is the diaphragm, and the lungs sit on it. In between, there is a very tough area that is called the central tendon, and on it, and the heart, is restless, keeps jumping and pumping. So this is where you have this tough area that serves as a foundation for it. So anyways, so you have now the parietal pleura lining the interior surface of the thorax. Now you have the pleural cavity, and then you have the pulmonary pleura or the visceral pleura, as it is sometimes called. So visceral pleura, the parietal pleura, and in between is the pleural cavity. Inside of the pleural cavity, you have the surfactant, and also you have negative air pressure. So then let's talk now the pulmonary linkage. This linkage here that connects that makes the external surfaces of the lungs adhere to the internal surface or the interior surface of the thorax. So that is this. If I say what is the parietal pulmonary pleura, I say, excuse me, that it is the pleural linkage that is made up of the parietal pleura, the visceral cavity, and it what does it do? It enables the walls, exterior surfaces of the lungs to adhere to the interior surfaces of the thorax. So that is your definition of what the parietal pulmonary linkage is. The information is here, exactly describes it. What are the functions now? Why do we need to have this linkage? The purpose is to enable us to expand the lungs whenever the thorax expands. Okay, so number one, to enable us to expand the volume of the lungs whenever the thorax volume expands. Number two, to allow the lungs to expand anterior-posteriorly and transversely with the lungs, and to enable them to remain open also all the time. So these are functions of this. If there's a hole here, like someone gets injured and the parietal and the air from outside goes into the pleural cavity, that is going to cause separation, and it will cause the suction cup to fall off the windshield, just like that. So the lungs will be just like they will collapse. So these are the functions. Again, this is what this parietal pulmonary linkage does, how it is made, and how it does, it is its job. Now, keep an eye on the diaphragm. The diaphragm is also lined up with that thin pleura that is slippery, and the bottom of the lung sits on each side of the diaphragm. And as the two pleurae, the part of the pulmonary pleura that is lining the inferior surface or the inferior surfaces of the lungs, that part of the visceral pleura comes in contact with the diaphragmatic pleura. As a result, in the gap in between, there's the negative pressure, there is surfactant, and when you have that now, that situation, you have created the pulmonary, the diaphragmatic pulmonary linkage. So that whenever the diaphragm goes down, it will pull the bottom of the lungs down. And that is going to enable you to expand, like as a range. When you pull the pump down, you can expand the volume simply. So the diaphragm serves like the handle of a pump. You just pull it down, It makes the lung, it brings the lungs down to expand them vertically. This accounts for the greatest amount of expansion that the lungs can have. And this is the primary part, primary linkage for us to breathe, that enables us to breathe at rest. You know, the diaphragm is the primary muscle of respiration. It enables us to breathe in and out at rest. And we don't need, at rest, we do not need the accessory muscles as much. So the accessory muscles means they are kind of secondary. It means, yeah, I have them, but I only use them when I exert effort, when I speak. But normally, if I'm sitting there, I'm breathing, I just use the diaphragm. So every time the diaphragm contracts, goes down, it allows the lungs to be pulled down to expand the volume vertically. Okay, so that is the biggest function of this diaphragm, diaphragmatic pulmonary linkage, to allow vertical expansion of the lungs. And you create negative pressure, and that will bring the air into your lungs. So here's the parietal pulmonary. So here, what I said, you know, if you look closely, you'll find where the lungs are sitting here, transparent, sitting here on top of the diaphragm, and making a seal through the pleural linkage. So when the diaphragm goes down, it brings the lungs down to expand, and it gives you basically, it makes the thorax expand maybe up to, I think, 30% or so more. But in any case, it creates vertical expansion. It creates more expansion than the thoracic elevation. So this is the diaphragmatic pulmonary pleural linkage. Know exactly how it is created. Two pleurae, which one? The diaphragmatic pleura, the pulmonary pleura, that is lining the inferior surface of the lungs, and you know, the diaphragmatic pleura that lines the dorsum of the diaphragm. And in between, there is the pleural cavity. Inside of that pleural cavity, there's negative air pressure, there is surfactant, and now we have created a seal. Now the stuck the bottom is stuck to the diaphragm. So whenever the diaphragm goes down, it will pull the lungs with it. This is needed only for inhalation. Okay. Now suppose that you have this condition now. Yeah, now you have this diaphragmatic pulmonary linkage working well. So the diaphragm will contract. When it contracts, it goes down. Okay, it means it goes down. You need to expand the volume. So you bring the diaphragm contracts to descend, and it will create greater volume. Now, suppose that you are now because of this linkage, the diaphragm is going down, dragging the bottoms of the lungs down. Suppose that that the top of the lungs is loose. It's not anchored to anything. As you pull from below, that is going to bring the lungs down to collapse them. So we need another linkage. We need the cervical linkage that is going to be in this particular area here, that is going to make like a suction cup, that is going to keep the top or the superior surfaces of the lung walls, both sides, to adhere or to stick to the inferior surfaces of the cervix. The cervix is the hole around the neck. So, and this area here is called the cervical pleura. So, the cervical pleura, as I mentioned, also sometimes called apical, means the top one. It is made up of the same 5 conditions. However, in that case, we need to be specific. Which pleurae make it? Number one, the cervical pleura that is lining the inferior surface of the cervix on both sides below the shoulders, and the visceral pleura or the pulmonary pleura that lines up the top of the lungs. These two come together. In between, there is the same, pleural cavity. Inside of the pleural cavity, the two conditions exist: the negative air pressure and surfactant, and that causes the suction that suspends the lungs from above. So when the diaphragm goes down, the lungs are stable and they are easily expanded, and the volume expands. So while the diaphragm goes down, then you also have the thoracic wall being lifted, the thorax being lifted up and expanded by the muscles of inhalation. And that gives you, at the same time, at once, for the process of inhalation, it gives you two things at once. It gives you the vertical expansion by the diaphragm. It gives you the anterior-posterior expansion and the transverse expansion of the thorax. All of these give you a greater volume inside of the lungs. And you mean now, you create the conditions for Boyle's law. So now, for Boyle's law, it says the greater the volume, for a volume that's enclosed in a container, the greater the volume is, the lower the pressure. And the smaller the volume is, the higher the pressure. So now you have created a great volume inside of the thorax and, of course, inside of the lungs. And that has now created negative air pressure inside of the lungs. So that is going to suck air from outside through the nose or through the mouth. And then the air keeps coming in until the point of equilibrium, until the atmospheric pressure outside equals the pressure inside of the lungs. So you know now how the linkages are related to volume of the lungs. So the purpose is to enable the lungs to always stay, to enable the lungs to expand with the thoracic wall and with the movement of the diaphragm. So that is generally, that is the function of all of them together, but each one has its own function. So in terms of muscles, now we have so many muscles that you have studied. You are going to review them in the textbook. Respiratory muscles. You have the diaphragm as the number one muscle that is responsible for inhalation and exhalation, does just about all the work for the two processes at rest. Now then, you have a set of accessory muscles for inhalation and some accessory muscles for exhalation. So these muscles of inhalation are needed. For example, the accessory muscles of inhalation are needed. They work with the primary muscle, with the diaphragm. See the diaphragm and how it is lined up. The central tendon is here. They work together. I mean, the accessory muscles work together with the primary muscle, the diaphragm, in order to create, to expand, lift up the thorax and expand it. So we have anterior thoracic muscles in the front of the chest, on the sides, posterior thoracic muscles. We have neck muscles. We have upper arm and shoulder muscles. And we have back muscles. All of these together, and abdominal muscles, of course, all of these work together to enable us to inhale. And again, the information is in your textbook, and you need to review it because this class is not supposed to be a repetition. It's just to connect anatomy to the physiology of speech and hearing. So then, the mechanics or the steps, the process of inhalation. It is described to you here, right here, as it is step by step. So it shouldn't really be, it shouldn't be hard for you to be able to explain it and explain how it goes, especially now that you have had anatomy and physiology already. So a cycle of respiration can start anywhere. It can start at the end of inhaling, or it can start at the end of exhaling. But it is easier for us to start it at the end of exhalation. So you have some air inside of your lungs, you exhale it. Now there's a tiny pause, and the process, like a seesaw, the process will swing back again to the inhalation mode. So at the end of expiration, inside of the lungs is at equilibrium with atmospheric pressure. This is where the two pressures equalize, and then you pause, and then centers in your brainstem are going to swing, are going to deactivate the muscles of exhalation, and they will activate the muscles of exhalation, so that you elevate the thorax and elevate it from behind, from the top, from the sides. So these commands come from the brain stem, okay, as part of the autonomic nervous system to regulate your breathing. So again, you can add them here. You should add them here. I intentionally don't add everything on the slides. This is why, I mean, if I added everything, you don't need me. I can just put the stuff there and you can read it. So you're supposed to take notes and integrate that into this process. So now, the muscles of inhalation are activated all at the same, just about the same time. The primary muscle, the diaphragm, is always sitting up like this. From the moment that you were born, it was up because you were not breathing. So once you start to take your first breath, after breath, it just contracts. And from that point on, it keeps going up and down for you to breathe. So the diaphragm, after expiration is done, the diaphragm at expiration is up to where it normally is. So if you push it away from rest, it has to come back again up. So when it contracts, it goes down. So first, when the muscles again of inhalation are activated, first the diaphragm is going to contract. There are two nerves called the phrenic nerves that activate the diaphragm into contraction. As it goes down, at the very same time, the thoracic muscles will lift up the thorax. and expand it at the same time. But here we have to explain step by step. So when the diaphragm contracts, it will expand, it will go down to expand the lung volume and now give you vertical expansion. However, as it goes down, it pushes on the abdominal organs, and the abdominal organs have, so they are going to be pushed up against the abdominal muscles, and the abdominal muscles bulge out. The normal position should be vertical, but with the diaphragm pushing down on the abdominal organs, they have nowhere to go, so they will push out on the abdominal muscles to create room. The abdominal muscles will be like this, but they are going to want to come back to this. So now, at the same time, the accessory muscles that we named the groups of, they're going to expand, lift up the thorax from all sides, and this way they will expand the thorax anteroposteriorly and transversely at the same time while the diaphragm is expanding it vertically. Now we're speaking about speech, we're speaking about activity, because we don't, I mean, what we care about here is inhalation and exhalation for speech. So then, we have created a larger volume inside of the lungs. Creating that volume is going to make the pressure decrease, and that creates Boyle's law. So the greater the volume, as the volume of an inside an enclosed container, as the volume is expanded, then the pressure inside of that container decreases. So now, immediately, this results in suction. Negative air pressure creates suction. So that's going to suck the air from outside, and the air will continue to stream into the lungs until the point of equilibrium, until the atmospheric pressure equals the pulmonary pressure. And then you will feel you have taken enough air now, and the process is paused just for a few seconds. And then it swings back again to the mode of exhalation. So it is the best thing for you is to begin at the end of the expiration or exhalation. Take it step by step to describe the steps in the process. If you mix up the steps, the whole process is useless. It doesn't mean anything. When I say a process, it's like making a recipe. You know, you have to follow that recipe. First, you have to heat the butter. Then you have to do this. You have to do that. If you mess up with one step or leave out one step, then you cannot have a process. It doesn't work. So this is why here sequencing is an absolute must. And all the steps must be included when you describe the process of inhalation. Well, and you have to mention, this happens, and then it causes, you have to mention to say it causes that. And this also causes the next step. So it's like dominoes. So process here is quite easy, step by step. You have had it in anatomy and physiology. You are reviewing it now, and you really, really should have it under control. Now, for exhalation is easier than inhalation, because inhalation requires a lot of force to lift up the thorax and expand and to have the diaphragm contract, and a lot of power. It's like you roll a big boulder up the top of a hill, and then now you're on top of the hill. You want to push that boulder down. You don't need much force. You just give it a push, and it will tumble. It will roll down on its gradient. So the energy that you put into the process of inhalation, you reap it back. You get the benefit back when you do inhalation. Please pay attention to all the steps of these, because these are all exam questions, and they are explained here step by step. I'm not speaking about like complex math equations. I'm just speaking about things that you have studied in A&P, that you are studying now again and reviewing. And you really, if you want to be a speech language pathologist, you will not be able to become a speech pathologist if you do not master this information. Who else should? So now, there are three forces that are called passive forces of exhalation. So each one is going to act on particular structures, and each one is going to produce a particular effect. And you need to know the three forces, each one by name, and what it acts on, what structures it acts on, and the result of that action. So I'll walk you through that. So for the exhalation, we have passive forces, and then we have active forces, muscles. So the passive forces first, gravity. It's like you rolled that big boulder to the top of the hill. You put a lot of energy to get there. Now, all you need to do is just push that a little bit, and it's going to roll down because gravity is going to pull it down. So for the thorax is a very heavy structure. and the muscles lining it, in between the ribs and outside, and a lot of muscle, and muscle is heavy, and a lot of tissue, a lot of skin. So the thorax is a heavy structure. When it is lifted during inhalation, once the muscles of inhalation relax, then the gravity will bring down the thorax, will pull it down. So gravity acts only on the thorax, just the thorax. So the thorax starts to go down, to collapse. At the same time, something that happened when you were inhaling, the torquing process. Remember these pieces of cartilage that were twisted, that were torqued? These were like loaded with energy, and they are waiting. So now you loaded them for inhalation. Now, once you let go and the ribs are going to come down, the cartilages are going to snap back in position, and they will now bring the anterior part of the thorax. They act all together. They will bring the anterior part of the thorax, two movements, in and down. So untorquing, you have to explain that the torquing during inhalation is reversed, and as a result, all the anterior parts of the thorax, is that big part of the anterior part of the thorax is brought in and down. Again, all of this is going to put pressure on the lungs. So untorquing, again, enables the anterior thorax to come in, to be pulled in and down, and that will diminish, it will push on the lungs to decrease the volume. And the thorax also is coming down as a result of gravity, so the volume now starts to decrease. Elastic recoil. I mean, all of these conditions help us put pressure on the lungs so that we can reduce the volume and reverse the process. We expel the air out. So the elastic recoil, it means tissues that were stretched out during inhalation are now free to shrink back, because they by nature, they are like elastics, pieces of elastics. The lungs have high elasticity. The tissue is very elastic. You stretch it, and it's like a balloon. You give it a space to open the air, space, and the air will go out, and the walls of the balloon actually compress. As they go back, they push the air out. So the elastic recoil acts on three different structures. Okay, so now gravity acts on the thorax. Untorquing acts on the pieces of cartilage connecting the costal part of the osseous part of the ribs with the sternum. So then the elastic recoil acts on the lung tissue itself, because the lung tissue is like a balloon. It's going, if it has the airway open, the tissue is going to contract back to come back to its shrunk position, to its deflated position. As it does so, it will contribute to reducing the volume and expelling the air out. Now, this is the tissue of the lungs. Elastic recoil also acts on the abdominal walls. Remember, the diaphragm in inhalation was descended, contracted and descended. The abdominal organs were pushed out. The abdominal wall muscles were pushed out like this. Now, the diaphragm, during exhalation, the diaphragm, because of elastic recoil, is going to just bounce back again up to where it was. It's going to go up. As it goes up, the abdominal organs are going to go back in place. As a result, the muscles of the abdomen are going to go back in. Okay? So all of these three structures, elastic recoil acts on the lung tissue itself to make it, to deflate it. And it will act on the diaphragm, because the diaphragm, as it goes up only by elastic recoil. You all know that little toy, like half a ball, rubber ball, and if you push it down with your thumb, let go, wait, it's going to just jump up in the air. The diaphragm is like this. The natural position for it is that up position. Whenever something happens, it goes down, it's a matter of time. Then with the elastic recoil, it will regain its shape to be up like that. So these are the three structures, and the outcome of elastic recoil is to enable all these structures to decrease the volume of the lungs and to bring the diaphragm up again. And also in doing so, it was the abdominal muscles, when they go back again against the abdominal organs, that is going to also aid the diaphragm as it keeps going up. And now you have these passive forces creating already a lot of decreasing the volume in the lungs. And now when the lung volume decreases, what will result from that? You have increased pulmonary pressure, and that increased pressure, positive, is going to force the air out of the lungs. The air will continue to stream out until the point of equilibrium is reached again. But because we are speaking about speech inhalation and exhalation, you are going to deploy the active forces as well, because you need more pressure. So active forces means that these muscles of expiration will work more, that you need to, there are the accessory muscles, to pull down the thorax down more and in, to increase the pressure, because as I'm speaking, I am limited by the length of my sentence. I can't just leave it to the chance of, my breathing, and, maybe just my breathing is shallow. So if I just speak with just the little air that I have from the diaphragm, I'll be probably speaking like this. Okay, I wanted to tell you if you could please. So that doesn't, if I go just by the tidal volume, my speech is going to be so disfluent. Will be interrupted repeatedly. But we have one thought, one complete thought, put it in one sentence, and I have to hold my breath, and I have to put more pressure as I'm speaking so that I can continue speaking to end my thought without stopping in the middle. We even have to regulate how we swallow with how we speak. So this way we do not keep interrupting our speech and making it disfluent. So these forces, again, are needed because we speak about producing speech. And then, so you have the thoracic muscles and the abdominal muscles, and you have the details in your text, and you have the details. Yeah, I also would direct you, if you want to listen to, have a review, like I just Google Ahmed Abdullah and say respiration, and you'll find many videos on YouTube on my channel. So here's the process of exhalation. Actually, so the process, again, the steps of exhalation, I'm going to summarize them again. At the end, always you begin, if you are asked about exhalation, start with the end of inhalation. We are asked about inhalation, start at the end of exhalation, because that is a cycle. One thing starts from the end of the other. So at the end of the inhalation process, at the point of equilibrium, now the lung volume is expanded to the maximum limit. The thorax is lifted. The diaphragm is up. The signal comes from the centers of respiration and the brain stem. There are centers that regulate the breathing, inhale and exhale process automatically. So the signal comes to activate the process of exhalation. First, the passive forces are going to create, together, they are going to create a reversal of the inhalation process. They will reverse the movement of the muscles, Instead of having a larger volume now, the compression created by the pressure from gravity, elastic recoil, and untorquing, all of that's going to decrease the volume in the lungs. In addition, the muscles of the accessory muscles of exhalation are going to be activated to increase the pressure, to even decrease the lung volume even more. That is going to cause the diaphragm. It's going to cause the air, the positive air pressure is going to force the air out of the air will continue to stream out until the point of equilibrium is reached again, and the process is halted, and then vice versa. It is back to inhalation. So again, just know the steps, know how to describe the process in a systematic way, in an organized way. One breath or one cycle of respiration equals one inhalation and one exhalation. Now, in normal breathing, like rest breathing, more the time it takes to take a breath. Like if you want to, say for example, for an adult, let's see the time for an adult. The adult needs about 12 breaths per minute to 18. Let's say 12. You want to know how long it takes one cycle. 12 divided by, 1 minute divided by 12 breaths. So 1 divided by 12 equals 0.08. So that is like kind of, if you say, just to make it easy, give you an even number instead of making it confusing. Let's say that for example, we breathe 10 times per minute. That means 1/10 of a minute. That is less than 1/10 of a minute is going to be, the minute has 60 seconds. So it will be maybe 3/4 of a second. Let's just, for the sake of it, I want to give you the idea without complications. Let's say that one breath lasts half a second, for example. 60 seconds. Yeah, maybe let's make it 1 second. I'm sorry. Make it 1 second, like just for the sake of explaining it. 1 second. Now, the inhalation process at rest, you're not doing much effort, you're just sitting and breathing. At rest, inhalation takes about maybe 40 to 45% of that second. And then exhalation is going to be longer. It will take about maybe 50 or 55. Just, I mean, the difference is not great. It might be even, you could say, argue and say it's half and half, 50-50. But in reality, it takes slightly less, about maybe 45, percent of the cycle. And then about 55% goes to expiration or exhalation. Like when you want to blow a balloon, you go, it takes you less time. And then once you let go, it takes the balloon more time to expel that thing, the air inside of it. But for the sake of it, we say, well, the cycle is almost half and half between exhalation and inhalation, and exhalation. So the difference is not really very big. So it's about half and half. But for speech, the difference is great, is a lot. For speech, it is 90% of the cycle. 90% of the cycle is spent in exhalation. 10% is spent in inhalation, and 90% in exhalation. You want to try it? You just get a balloon, time yourself as you blow the balloon, hold it. Now hold the neck of the balloon and stretch it, and it will make a sound, of course. Hold it and stretch it out. Your vocal folds will close the top, will close the airway, just like you close the neck of the balloon. And you stretch it, you give the air pressure in the balloon a chance to overcome the edges of the balloon, the neck of the balloon, and that is going to create that buzz. So the same way, but you notice that it's going to take a lot of time for all the air to exit the balloon. These are simply, when you speak, you are closing the airway, and the air that goes out is the air that manages to escape, to force out the vocal folds, force them open and escape, and then the vocal folds close again, and then the air pressure builds up again, pushes them away, escapes. So you have puffs of air escaping, and 90% of the cycle is spent in exhalation because we speak as we exhale. You can advise you to watch this video, and you'll see the vocal folds and vibration. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot today. So in terms of respiratory pressures, lung volumes, and lung capacities, these are very important to understand because without pressure, you will not be able to speak. You need enough pressure so that you can force the edges of the vocal folds to be displaced, so you can force the air out of them so you can vibrate. So be careful. Not all pressures are the same. Not all pressures perform the same functions. First, we'll begin with the bottom one, with the lower, the one that is actually number 3 here, pleural or interpleural pressure. That is the pressure that is found in the pleural cavity, okay? In the pleural cavity that is around the lungs, all around the lungs, okay? Between the parietal pleura and the pulmonary pleura, in that cavity there, you have the pleural pressure or interpleural pressure. That pressure is the opposite of the pressure in the lungs. We are not speaking about the inside of the lungs. We are speaking about outside. The purpose of interpleural pressure is negative, is to create suction, is to suck the surfaces of the lungs out, to keep the lungs inflated all the time. The lungs cannot be deflated. They cannot collapse. They are inflated all the time. And because of what we explained, how the pleural linkages, work. So that kind of pressure is negative, and its purpose to breathe and stuff, it just holds the lungs, to enable the lungs to be suspended open all the time, and to stick to the walls of the thorax all the time. So when the thorax expands, the lungs expand with it. When the thorax comes back, so that is always negative, and the purpose is to hold the lungs to keep them inflated all the time. That is not related directly to speech, okay? And then you have two other kinds of pressure that are directly acting on the vocal folds to force them out, and these are positive pressures. So first, there is the alveolar or pulmonary pressure. That is the pressure, the pressure inside of the alveoli. You know, the alveoli, each lung has about 300 million tiny sacs called, each one is called an alveolus. And the alveoli is more than one alveolus. And this is where the air is exchanged, where oxygen is extracted. It's in your textbook, but each lung has about 300 million of these tiny sacs. So each one has particular level of pressure. The collective amount of pressure inside of the lungs is either called pulmonary pressure or alveolar pressure. That enables, all the force of that pressure, enables the lungs to act as one unit. And the pressure from them is going to lead to greater pressure inside the trachea. And then the pressure inside the trachea is going to enable us to have pressure underneath the vocal folds that is called subglottal or subglottic pressure. So now we have interpleural pressure that we explained negative, has nothing directly to do with speech. And then we have the alveolar or pulmonary pressure that drives subglottic pressure. If you don't have enough pulmonary pressure, you will not be able to have enough pressure in the trachea. You will not be able to have enough pressure beneath the glottis. Recall that the glottis is the space between the vocal folds. So subglottic means below the vocal folds. Supraglottic is above the vocal folds. So that is subglottic pressure. And without that, you would not be able to move, to displace the vocal folds into vibration. There is no way. The instrument to measure pressure, the tradition, I know it is the manometer, but the tradition, it was traditionally like this. It has like a U-shaped tube, pipe like this, and it has numbers, and it is filled either with water or mercury, and you would blow into like that column. You blow. As you blow, the air is going to go in, down, and it will force the mercury or the water up. And then you can see the measurements here. You can measure, does it go 1 millimeter or centimeter? Does it go 2, 3, 4, and so on? So it measures the amount of pressure that basically you can do, that you can put with your own breath. And either say the unit is H2O, means H2 means 2 hydrogens, O, 1 oxygen, H2O, that is water. Mercury will be Hg, mercury. And of course, they have them digital now. You just have a piece like this, and then you have a digital meter, you blow, and then that meter will show you the level you can put. Now, write this down, very important. The minimal amount of pressure that is needed to produce the softest speech sound. I have to have enough pressure, subglottic pressure, enough to blow the medial edges of the vocal folds apart to induce vibration. The minimal amount that is needed to produce the softest speech sound is 3 to 5 centimeters of Hg or H2O. Okay, 3 to 5. But when we speak, we can't whisper. We can't just all the time just speak in the softest way. When we do it as conversational level, like I'm speaking at 65 to 80 decibel, I need to have more pressure, and I cannot raise my voice without putting enough pressure. Loudness, it all depends on how much pressure you put. So we would need 7 to 10 centimeters H2O or Hg. Elevated enough, that pressure level, 7 to 10. Okay, that is for conversational speech. So you have two different numbers. The first one, 3 to 5, has to do with the softest speech sound, the minimal amount of energy to produce a human speech sound, the softest. But for conversational speech, 7 to 10. Spirometers are used to measure lung volumes and lung capacities. You want to know how much your lungs can hold under certain circumstances. And for example, if you want to have asthma examination, you would do this kind use a spirometer. It used to be called wet spirometer, like a big tube, glass tube, and it has like a little inside, like a floater, and then you stand there and just blow. I went once and I did it, and it was like, old traditional way, and you could see the thing rising. So this is now it is all digital. And there's a little instrument the man's having, he blows in, and there's a meter that is going to show the volume at different. So there are 4 different volumes, lung volumes, and there are 4 capacities, lung capacities. So lung volumes, they are individual numbers, and they speak about the amount of air that can be used, or in particular situations. But they're just one number, one unit, and a capacity has more than one volume. 2 or more. Lung volumes are measured by, capacities are measured by spirometer. And the volumes and capacities, again, they are measured in relationship to how much air you have at rest. So I am here doing tidal breathing, like the tide, go in and out, normally. So that means we basically use about 600, like half a liter of air. We take in half a liter and we send it out if we are not doing work. Even though our lungs can hold up to 6 liters. But, if we're not exerting effort, we just, inhale about 500 to 600 milliliters and expel that and keep doing that again. Of course, that's going to cause a lot of at the top. So now you have expelled and taking a tidal inhalation. And now when I exhale that, now I have reached the equilibrium point. I have air in my lungs, but I'm not using it. I'm not expelling it because there's no need to. If I'm for some reason I need to exert effort, I am gonna expel it. Or if I'm speaking, I continue to speak, and I can continue to speak until I use a lot of my resting volume. So here is a chart. There's another chart that makes it kind of friendly and easy for you. Let's go here. Let's say at this line here. The very beginning, between this dark, like light blue and light gray here at this line, is where you have now exhaled. So everything else, all these volumes will compare to that point. What they have above it, so one tidal inhalation, or the tidal volume, is the volume amount of air that you take in and expel at rest. And that is the 500 to 600 milliliters, like a half a liter. That is the amount here. Not much activity compared to all of this. So then you have the inspiratory reserve volume. You notice the capacities here, capacity. That includes from here to here, for example. That includes from here to the very end. So volumes first. Inspiratory reserve means that you have taken in a tidal inhalation. So I'm sitting here breathing and take a small, like a normal breath. But then I decide, when I have that breath, I decide to continue to make it into a deep breath. So then maybe I can force myself and take as much as I can. So the maximum inhalation that you can take. Imagine you are going to dive deep and you want to take the maximum amount of air that you can hold. So at this point now, I made reserve for myself. I took extra air because I'm going to need it underwater. So inspiratory reserve is the amount of air that you can inhale following a tidal inhalation, a rest inhalation. It is reserved because, you can. If you want, you can just do it and you'll have it. You can do what you want, but maybe you don't need it now. All right. So now, then we have expiratory reserve. Expiratory reserve is the amount of air that can be expelled after a tidal exhalation. So systematically, inspiratory reserve. Now you are kind of you are inhaling at rest, but you then decide to take expiratory. That you are breathing at rest, and then you inhale, and then you exhale. They have exhaled, but you decide to expel more air. And you try to expel all the air that you can after your tidal exhalation. So the maximum amount of air that you can exhale following a tidal exhalation, a rest exhalation. So it goes from all this air here, that blue band here, can be expelled if you have to expel it. So first you expel the tidal exhalation and amount, and then this is your reserve for expiratory reserve. You can expel it also if you have the need to. But there will be always a volume remaining in the lungs, okay, thanks to interpleural pressure. So that is called the residual volume. Residual volume is the amount of air left in the lungs after a maximum exhalation, after the expiratory reserve volume is gone. So that is your residual volume that enables the lungs to remain having an amount of air in the lungs and then in the airways and the trachea following a maximum exhalation. So now we spoke about residual volume, and the amounts are written in detail over there. So that is the amount here, and the reserve, and then tidal, and then the inspiratory reserve. So that gives us the volumes. The vital capacity, actually, we can speak about the functional residual capacity. It is this area here, from here to the end. So it includes functional residual capacity, includes the residual volume and the expiratory reserve volume. Functional residual capacity. Yeah, you have it there, and you could use parts of it if you want. This can use it. So 2 volumes here, and then the vital capacity includes the inspiratory reserve volume, all of this, and the tidal volume, all of this amount reserve. It is basically, vital capacity is all the amount of air available in the lungs, the amount for that you are actually able to use it to do work. Okay, because you cannot use the residual. Again, the amount available for speech, for breathing and deep breathing and so on, and it includes 1, 2, 3 volumes. Inspiratory capacity includes the volume plus the residual. The tidal volume. You know the numbers here, but I want to take you to the chart so that you can know exactly, because this doesn't really specify them exactly. And then the total lung capacity is the total amount of air that the lungs can hold, including everything, all the air. So we have averages that go 1,000. They are actually between 5,000 or maybe 4,500 to about 6,000 to 500 for females, and then 6,000 to 6,500 or even sometimes 7,000. So for males. And you notice, for example, how males have that chest that is like an inverted pyramid. The purpose of oxygen is to enable us to energize muscles. And by nature, males have 30% more muscle, and that needs a lot of oxygen. So if you look at these numbers in males and females, you always find it is close, like the amount of volume that a male has versus a female. You will notice that the male is going to have about almost 1/3 more airspace in the lungs because of the muscle bulk that they have. So for the lung values of each volume, you need to define it. So the value is on the adult, and a range that goes, for example, for both males and females, and that varies. Even among males, it varies because some people have larger chest composition. So tidal volume is about 600 to 750 milliliters, and they have reserve volume. So know the definitions and know the exact amount that each volume has, and you need to really memorize them. And the same for capacities. Each capacity is defined here, but the averages. So vital capacity, say for adults, finding the male plus female is about 5,000 milliliters, which is like 5 liters. 1 liter has 1,000 milliliters. And there is a functional residual capacity. That is what you can use to actually produce speech. If you can do work with it. 500 milliliters to 3,500, like about 2.5 liters to 3.5 liters. Make sure to use the correct value at the end. Example. Inspiratory reserve, again, similar, 2,500 to 3,500, and then total lung capacity, or like the conservative kind of averages between 5,000 and 6,000, but they vary significantly from male to female. Okay, now for breathing patterns, there are about 3 different kinds of breathing, and of course there are combinations, and combinations tend to be the best for speech. So first we have diaphragmatic or abdominal breathing, and that basically, as you breathe, your abdominal muscles go out a little bit. Your stomach, just goes out a little bit and comes back. So as it keeps going in and out, without making a lot of stress and movement and stuff like that, that is an effective way of breathing. For example, people who go into meditation, who go into training to sing, that is going to give them the ability to expand the thorax, to do, a lot of expansion in the lower part of the thorax and the abdomen. That doesn't put a strain on the structures. So as a result, it decreases your effort. If you are a singer, you know what that is. It enhances voice production, and actors and speakers do learn how to perform that kind of breathing, so that they're speaking and singing and so on. It doesn't produce a lot of strain and stress, but it's not enough by itself to generate dynamic speech. You have to utilize the thorax. Also, thoracic breathing is necessary for speech, of course, but a combination of thoracic and abdominal is the best. So that is characterized by lateral protrusion of the thorax and little protrusion of the abdominal wall. Clavicular breathing is the kind to be discouraged, is the kind that is not healthy. The clavicles are here, your shoulder bones. Recall that the segments of cartilage that connect the bony part of the rib to the sternum, they are tiny at the on the top. As you go down, they become gradually bigger. So on top, there isn't much room for expansion. So the clavicles, like this, every time you lift up like that, you put a lot of strain on the muscles here and a lot of stress around the neck and the shoulders. And imagine you breathe, 25 times in your age, maybe 18 times, maybe 20 times per minute. That's a lot of lifting and tension that could produce voice problems and joint problems here. And it does not produce much expansion anyways. So it's not an effective way. So when you are working with someone who stutters or someone who has a voice disorder, and you notice as they speak, they have a lot of movements here, you target this immediately for intervention